quick in our thinking, that out of confused issues may come simplicity of plan, that out of fear may come confidence, that out of hurry may come deliberation, that out of frustration may come guidance. Let us get to work, not head first, but heart first. May we be able to disagree without being disagreeable, to differ without being difficult, to be honest without tension, and frank without offense, in an atmosphere of team spirit. Amen.
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 Do I hear an approval? Yes. Do I hear a motion for approval of the September 8th?
Second.
Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Ayes have it. Bids and purchases.
So move.
I'll move for approval of items.
Second by Councilmember Griffin. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Item number 4, budget, finance, and revenue.
Move for approval. Second.
Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 The ayes have it. Item 5,
Move for approval.
Second.
Second.
moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, I think the mayor had his hand up.
I'm sorry, I got to start looking at the screen.
Aye.
Mecklenburg.
Right, so thank you. Back to bids and purchases, I did want to point out that the third item involved getting a new vendor for garbage and trash collection out on Daniel Island and Cainhoy. And it'll be a new company for us. And I see Councilmember Del Chapo raising her hands. So we look to provide a better service through a new vendor. And then number 4 and 5, I know council knows, but just to let for the public record, those are adjustments to our 2020 budget, both the revenue side and the expenditures, to adjust for the challenges we've faced this year with COVID-19. I would further say that there are other hospitality and accommodations budgets that we will come back to council a little later in the year, which will have similar adjustments. So my point of that is to say that the revenue shortfall indicated in this budget amendment tonight, this evening, is just a part of the story. It's not the whole story. It's a big part of the story, but it's not the whole story of our impact from COVID-19.
Thanks for that, Mayor.
Thank you.
Any other discussions on any of those items? If not, item 6,
Move for approval.
Second.
moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Item 7,
I'll move for approval.
Second. Second.
moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Aye.
Okay,
I think that
I'm
the
sorry,
mayor,
Mayor.
mayor had his hand up.
Yeah, I'd just like to add another editorial comment. I presume this grant funding was available through the CARES Act, but we will have a shelter that we will be able to do portable vaccine stations throughout the city when a vaccine becomes available for COVID-19, which we all hope is sooner rather than later. We plan to make some of our facilities like Arthur Christopher Gym and other places available for distribution of the vaccine. But in addition to that, we'll have a mobile unit within our own possession to be able to help facilitate the vaccine.
Thank you for that, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Questions? If not, item number 8,
Move for approval.
Move for approval.
moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say
Mr. Chairman,
Aye.
Councilman Jackson has her hand up.
I vote aye, but I would just like to request, this sounds like an intriguing a grant, and I would hope that maybe the mayor's office might be able to send out some more follow-up information with this. I'd really like to follow up on it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think that will, of course, come if we are successful getting the grant. But frankly, we plan to proceed with this effort, whether we get the $5,000 grant or not. And it's to help those in our community who are underbanked to get some financial literacy, if you will. And so we've got some good partners on board, like Bank of America and one of the credit unions and TD Bank. And so with or without the grant, we plan to bring forward a program to help our citizens. And maybe Mindy could add more to that.
I mean, Mayor, I do recall, I mean, this is really not new. It's something that I think that we have been involved in before through other programs. So this is more of an extension of what is, I'm sorry, Mindy.
Oh, that's okay.
Extension of what we've been doing, Mindy.
Well, you're 100% correct. We did have a Bank On initiative in Charleston several years ago. So this will be a revival, so to speak, of that effort. And so, yes, we are very much looking forward to bringing more financial empowerment to the individuals and families in our community. And we'll be working with adults and youth through this. So I see it as a great opportunity to just breed more partnerships and get the services to the citizens.
Thank you, and thank you for all you do.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mindy, and thank you, Chairman. I have been listening in to the Economic Empowerment Committee of the Commission on Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation, and hopefully they already know about this, but if not, we really do need to do that cross-pollination. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yes. To your point, we are definitely partnering with business and neighborhood services on this effort as well.
We did vote on that, right? Already? Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Item number 9.
Move for approval.
Second.
Second.
Moved and properly second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 The ayes have it. Item number 10.
Move for approval.
Second.
Second.
Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
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 Ayes have it. Item 11, stormwater management.
Second.
approval.
Moved and
Second.
properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Item 12,
Move for approval.
Second.
Second.
moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Item 13,
Move for approval.
Second.
moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Item 14,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, council member.
yeah, so I want to make sure I do this in proper procedure. So I sent out an email to all of y'all about a request to create a ad hoc committee. And I've talked to the mayor about this and also our legal counsel. So I think what I would like to do is create this ad hoc commission. It's not on the agenda tonight. So I think the proper procedure may be to move to defer items 14 and 15, and then come back next week or next session to create this task force that I outlined in email to all of y'all to create a way for citizens and other organizations to participate in making decisions regarding this these twin smokestacks. So I think properly, and I think the mayor may want to amend this, but I think properly would be to defer 14 and 15 and then come back unless we amend the agenda. The other side tail to this, in my discussions with the mayor, was maybe to go forward with part of the contract with Bennett. I think it was like either $140,000 or $160,000 like the engineering study and proposal for this. So that sounds like a convoluted motion that would get me kicked out of court if I said it in the courtroom. But my motion would be to defer until next week to then just bring up this discussion on this task force.
A second.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mayor Tecklenburg.
Could
Mayor
I,
Tecklen-
could I respectfully suggest maybe a little modified route forward?
Sure.
Because, you know, we've been working on this issue of the stacks for some time, not just our conversations recently, but capital projects and Craig Bennett for a while. And I feel some urgency for us to kind of move the ball forward one way or the other. And Edmund is on the line, and I believe Craig Bennett is on the line as well. I see his name here. And so I would respectfully ask that we consider number 14, and if it's and you'd have the opportunity to ask Craig and Edmund any questions to clarify anything, and then amend number 14 to include Councilmember Shade's a proposal to have a task force work hand in hand with the effort going forward, because I don't want to just, I respect what we're trying to accomplish with the task force. I don't want to just kick the ball down the road. People have been waiting for the city to take some action on this matter. We have a letter from our chief building official about the stability. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to go ahead and take that first step, which is to hire Mr. Bennett to come up with the specific plan and documents in order to preserve them, if that's in fact what we choose to do when the task force convenes and comes back to us. So does that sound reasonable to you, at least for discussion purposes?
It sounds reasonable.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Griffin?
Yes, sir. Appreciate you recognizing me. I was wondering, should we go ahead and make a decision whether or not we want them torn down or not? Because if the task force is, I mean, to me, those are completely different things. Either we want, there may be some of us that want to vote on taking them down all the way, but if the consensus is to save at least a portion, then I can understand the task force. But if the consensus of council is to take them down, I don't think you need a task force. So I was wondering if we could at least discuss, are there other members of council? I'm still leaning towards staying within the budget and spending the 500,000 and taking them down all the way. I don't know if other council members are leaning that way either, but if more people were inclined to do that, then I don't think we would need a task force. I think the task force would be more for renovations and keeping them up for some sort of height.
So in that event, the motion would fail for the contract and the task force.
Well, I'm going to vote for the task force. I'm just saying, why would we need to have the task force if people were going to vote to take it down? I'm just saying, can we at least discuss that first to make sure that's not the consensus, and then take a vote? Because I'm going to vote for the task force, but I would probably also vote to take them down.
Then you probably won't need the task force.
Right.
Councilwoman Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up to the mayor's suggestion. I would agree that we should have the task force after hearing from the public to the extent that we can. And I also know that the preservation community has been, I think, talking among themselves, but also to the East Side neighborhood as the most directly impacted neighborhood, about the proposition of retaining the oldest stack and demolishing 100% the newer one, to leave the skyline at least with that industrial icon, but also help the city to avoid the big expense that we don't have a source for preserving both of them. So I do think that there's rationale in Councilmember Shade's reasons to seat a task force that would work quickly. But just getting back to the mayor's request of agreeing to number 14 to hire the Bennett firm, the way I read that is the hiring would be for the objective of working on engineering the partial demolition, which I thought we all agreed 2 weeks ago that, or at the work session a week ago, that there's really no affinity now for the 60-foot height, which is the way I read this number 14. So if we can modify that on the fly, then I'm happy to, to hire the structural engineering work to be done along with the task force.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just for clarification, we have an update from Mr. Bennett and Mr. Moth that addresses that. The contract would be amended for him to pursue the wishes of the task force, but we need to get him started at work. That's so it would be amended as well. We have a proposal from Mr. Bennett that we could discuss if we ever got this on the floor.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Yes, to my colleagues, I understand what you are trying to do and what you are saying. When the task force, even with the task force, when I spoke to Councilman Peter Shade, I told him that I don't even want to see another committee. I said, we have so many committees going on and we are running crazy with a lot of committees, and I said, we need to make a decision one way or the other. I know what they're saying in the community. There's a splitting community of wanting it, tearing it down. People get angry with me about that in the community, but you have on the community, everybody is now on the same page with that. A lot of people were saying in the community, tear down. He said, it don't serve any purpose, actually. And I said, as we wait and we keep waiting, price goes up also. And see, when price goes up, we're in the strain of money as it is now. And this, like a smokestack, I explained to a lot of people with the smokestack, a lot of people talking about the smokestack, but don't even know what the smokestack was all about. They said it's the icon of the smokestack, of the presence of the smokestack. That's what they're looking at, most of the presence of the smokestack. But the smokestack really does not serve any purpose, actually. So that's why I came with that provision of saying, bringing it down halfway. And that's what I came up with, that solution to come with a compromise, if you may, with the community of staying 136 feet in the air. But also I attached to that, Mr. Mayor, when we was talking about it, is bringing the cap down off the top, if that can happen, bringing the cap and place it on the top of that, which you will have to do brickwork to bring it smaller, because as the smokestack goes down, it gets wider. So you still have to bring it up. So it'll be it'll be higher than 60 feet actually. So it's still be up in the air. And when we came up with the price tag on it, it was a little different case then, because the price tag was almost close to demolishing it, bringing it down halfway, or wherever the case may be. So that's the position that I have.
I don't know how
on it, because let's mute our phones, please.
Yeah, some people, they have mixed emotion on the inside with the smokestack. And I was talking with them. I go and speak to the people on the east side because it's the district that I represent. So I go and speak to the people on the east side. You got a few saying, oh, let it stay up. You got other few on the other side saying, hey, tear it down. You don't want to see other money being used for that, and something is being used for people who is living now, and to stop with living with drainage and other things that's happening in the city. So, I'm the one that's going to get beat up one way or the other, what I'm saying, in the community. And so I'll bite the bullet on whatever case may be, because I'm going to do what I feel that is right for the community, is right for people who is living, is right for people who have to go through these changes and challenges with whatever happened in the community. And that's my thing, what it is. It's about people who is living, and the smokestack was there. And I know what it was. Like I mentioned to the council before, that we lived there. My family and I lived there back in 1948 when the smokestack was there. And it was said that the smokestack was there, yes, but it was a health hazard to the community. And when they moved the smokestack, they moved it because of that factor. And it came, and the dump was placed, what they call back to green.
In my neighborhood.
Right in the African-American neighborhood. It's always in the African-American neighborhood that these things was placed, because nobody wanted the smokestack in their community, which was not the smokestack, but it was the incinerator. No one else in Charleston wanted it in their community, so they dumped it right there in that community, and they burned everything, and all the smoke that was coming down was a health hazard for the community. And eventually they closed it, but they created the dump back to green. And that's the part of the history of it that was told by me back in those times by my father and grandparents who was living in those areas. And they know more about it than I did, but I remember when they was telling me about the smokestack and the history of the smokestack. It's not really history. It just was something that was burning. You don't know what else they've been burning in there. That's all I have to say on that. That's my
question. Yeah.
So whatever the council want to do, it's fine. But that's my take on the smokestack.
Okay, Councilman, just 2 points from me. The first is, I think that the suggestion of the task force would in fact answer many of the questions that you just articulated. But, okay, are we forgetting that this is an imminent threat to public safety? If public safety is our number one responsibility as leaders of the community, the more we continue to kick this can down the road, okay, we are subjecting our constituents to potential harm. So for me, it's not as different as the exigency that existed with respect to the Gatson Creek and the effect that the poisons from the creek would have on the community. I see very little difference to this. So I just wanted to put that on the table, that for me, the issue is, how do we protect the public from a potential threat? And how do we do that as quickly as possible? Regardless of all the wants, to me, the bottom line is public safety. Councilman Sheed?
Actually, I think Councilmember Seekings had his hand up before.
Oh, I'm sorry, he did. Councilman Seekings.
I think the mayor did too. So I think the Councilmember Shade is right in terms of procedure. We need to decide on the task force or not, because that is going to indicate which direction we want to go. And my understanding is on the two matters that are on our Ways and Means Committee, one of which is to sign a contract with Mr. Bennett to design a fix, not to take these down. And it may be that the task force wants to go and hire someone else to do it. I would remind everybody who, as we sit here tonight, I think in about day 37 of talking about this, that this will be the first time we've as a body heard from Mr. Bennett. So I think if it's the desire of this council to look at our options and to think about stabilizing and in place, or some combination of one of the two, that we need to determine whether or not we're ready to go forward with that. And I think we should determine that tonight. I mean, I don't think we should kick it down the road 2 weeks if we want to hire someone to give us our options and to save these smokestacks, which, by the way, I think we not only should do, we are mandated to do. Then we ought to get moving on that process today, but we have to determine whether or not Councilmember Shade's methodology is the way to go. I don't know how we get there. I don't know how we get there, but that's how I think we should proceed.
So I had proposed a way for this, but there's a lot of conversation. Could I suggest, whether it's in order or not, that we allow Craig Bennett to say a few words about where he is with his analysis of the stacks? And Mr. Chairman, we did address, even though it's a temporary matter, the evacuation plan for those in the immediate vicinity. So we have temporarily addressed the public safety issue, but we haven't done it long term, and that's why I agree with Councilmember Seeking. We need to go ahead and take some action to move this ball on down the road. If it pleases council, let's hear from Mr. Bennett and have him share with us his expertise and opine on this matter. Is that okay?
Mayor, I think you're right. Let's hear from Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett? Craig?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. We've actually been working on these chimneys for quite a while, about 2.5 years. and have been studying some work that goes back much longer than that. And there've actually been a number of things that have been said that I'm a little uncomfortable with, that I think it's important to recognize that even 2.5 years ago, as we looked at the chimneys, we recognized that that there were several options, and there still are several options available to us as to what we want to do with these things. 2.5 years ago, we said one option was to let's see, actually, this was 2 years ago, I take that back, that the historically appropriate ways to repair the shell and take down the liner so it's not a danger, and or repair the liner so it's not a danger. And then then another option was to actually disassemble the chimneys. At that time, we actually recommended proceeding with the first option, which was a repair option. And the reason had surprisingly little to do with the structural engineering side. What we realized at that time was that that if we proceeded with taking these down, it would actually harm the city's ability to deal with similar projects that come up in the future. And for that reason, we recommended going ahead and doing some repair on those things. Since that time, we've looked at a number of different options. We've looked at the options of repairing them. We've looked at the options of taking them both halfway down, and we've looked at the option of taking them all the way down. All of those options are still, from a structural standpoint, possible. And I understand full well that the city has done a good job of meeting with the neighborhood and has contingency plans in place for dealing with especially high wind events. So the city has bought some time there. In addition, I think all of you should know that it's my understanding that that there's a chimney inspection company coming next week to take a look at the chimneys and to see whether or not there's been any significant change since the inspection 4 years ago. I think that's probably all I really need to say, but let me open things up to questions now. Yes, sir. Councilman Shade?
You're on mute, council member.
Okay. So, yeah, so this is more of a statement than a question to the committee at large. So my thought process with this has been that pretty much in line with what Councilman McGriffin had said earlier. And that is the straightforward way of addressing these smokestacks is just to go ahead and spend $500,000 or so and tear them down. The problem is with all of that is that I don't have a clear sense of the community as to what they want to do with these. And because there is, as Councilmember Gregory has said, our #1 responsibility is the safety and security of our citizens. If these things topple over in the meantime, then we have not fulfilled our obligation to protect our citizens from this happening. So, but once we decide to take these down, they're down. And we are a city that likes preservation. We are a city that likes to preserve our history and celebrate our history. And so this is sort of more of a pause button to give ourselves an opportunity. The urgency had been that we were in the beginning of or in the midst of a storm season, and we needed to do something very quickly to avoid these things from falling down. So my idea was that if we can create this task force they can help us maneuver and navigate through all of this. This is a sensitive subject for a lot of folks, and I wanted to make sure that whatever decision we did, we just followed our normal protocol and procedures in doing that. So if, per the mayor's request, that we approve Mr. Bennett's contract for $160,000 to start the process of the engineering work on this, that would suit, I think, our needs, and then come back and vote on this task force and let them handle this. And that's going to include members of city council, members from our city staff, members from the community, and members from our two prominent historic foundation and preservation society. So we get a clear input on all of this. And when it comes to funding, we ending up half of this and see what the community can do and ending up the other half. So let's move forward with the mayor's proposal, vote on the 160, come back and vote on this task force next week, and then we can get this thing moving in some direction. So we're not spending half of our Ways and Means time on debating this thing back and forth the past 3 or 4 meetings. And that was my goal. That's my intention. That's why I sent this to all of you in a little bit in advance, so y'all saw what I was coming from. But I am at the will of y'all's decisions and what y'all want to do. But that was my intentions, and that's what my concerns are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do I hear a second on that? Is that a motion?
Yes, sir.
Chairman,
Second.
So it's moved and seconded.
Mr. Chairman.
Discussion, yes. Council Member Waring.
Thank you. I had some technical difficulties. I had to switch over from my laptop to an iPad. And what I was hearing for something you brought up, Mr. Chairman, is the safety issue. Did Mr. Bennett answer that one way or the other? So is the safety issue no longer, I'm not going to say no longer an issue, but do we have more time to work with this versus it falling over on the public?
I think one of the things, Councilmember Waring, that the mayor mentioned is that we have already met with the community. There is a contingency plan just in case there is an imminent threat so that the area can in fact be evacuated. Am I correct, Mayor?
Yeah, but I would like to hear Mr. Bennett comment on that.
Mr. Bennett?
Just a sec, I'll get all unmuted here. Yes, sir. There's no way to 100% eliminate threat, but there is a significant reduction in threat by being able to move people out of the danger zone around those chimneys if a significant wind event is expected. And so we have dramatically cut risk by doing that. We're going to know a whole lot more next week too, as to what the condition of the inside is. We'll know that by the end of next week. And but my gut feel at this stage is we've dramatically cut our risk, but it's not zero. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you for your professional opinion on that. Well, that is, obviously the safety issue to me is paramount, but if looks like we got a little more time, I can go with the task force as well.
Did I see your hand, Councilwoman Del Chapo?
Sort of. I don't really know. I kind of going back and forth with what I'm trying to ask. So if we take items 14 and 15 now.
14 only.
Right. So I guess that's my question. So 14, because we would like Mr. Bennett to be able to go ahead and get going and retain his services. Can we go ahead and, are we going ahead and saying yes or no to a task force tonight along with number 14?
Correct. That's the amendment.
And then what does that do to number 15? Because I feel as though depending on what the task force comes back with will affect number 15.
I would predict it will go away. We'll defer it for now, but we could withdraw it later on.
Okay. That's the clarity I wanted. Thank you.
I have a motion on the floor and it's been seconded. I saw the mayor's hand and then Councilman Seeking's hand.
So I did want Edmund Most just to briefly describe a specific amendment to the contract with Mr. Bennett and what has been submitted, so we would know what we're getting for our money, so to speak.
Edmund?
So the current proposal that we have in hand right now, it would include a full renovation to both structures. And the cost of that is $160,000, but we have a design contingency within that would be authorized by a city representative of up to $40,000. So this proposal would be, again, a full renovation to both stacks, which is very different than what's item number 14 right now, which is only for a partial disassembly and a partial renovation.
So I just want to make that clear. So we're engaging with Mr. Bennett to get the design done, to know what it will really take to preserve the stacks, okay? So when the task force meets, they can come back and say, yeah, we want to proceed, and we don't have to start at that point in January with engineering and design. We need, I believe we need to get this ball rolling. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't preclude the fact that in January, the task force might say, gee, we changed our mind. We recommend taking them down. I don't think that will happen, but I want to be ready to go and get going.
Yeah, I have a question, based on Edmund's comment. Edmund, are you suggesting that perhaps we need to rewrite 14 somehow because it does contain the partial removal provision in there?
That's part of the amendment.
To remove that?
Correct.
Okay.
We're amending the contract for a full design on preserving the stacks. It'll use the existing budget that we have of $800,000 still in this project budget. And so when the task force meets and makes their recommendation, if it is to preserve the stacks and they're able to raise half the money, like is prescribed by Councilmember Shade, then we'll just keep on rolling.
Okay, it's time to vote.
Wait, I have my hand up and I think you called on me.
Councilman Seeking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, I just want to point out that in Mr. Bennett's comments, he did say 2.5 years ago, they looked at this, they looked at all the options, that we still have our options available. They've reduced significantly the risk factor. And I think what he said, and I just want to make sure we're clear as we go forward and the task force goes forward, is that 2.5 years ago, the recommendation from Mr. Bennett and his team was to preserve the smokestacks for, among other reasons, because it would preserve our ability going forward, not just on this project, but on many projects in the city, to make sure that historic preservation stays at the forefront of considerations when we look at engineering challenges with other buildings. So I don't think anything's going to change going forward now that we've gotten Mr. Bennett to put on the record that we have managed our risk to a point where he's comfortable with it. So I look forward to the task force going forward and figuring out a way to preserve these smokestacks going forward. Thank you.
I agree. We don't want to set that kind of precedent, Councilman Seeking. I agree with you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
did Councilmember Shade withdraw his initial motion to defer?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and it wasn't seconded.
Yeah, I was actually.
It was?
It was.
Yeah, I thought Carol said. Carol said.
Carol second.
Right, Carol did.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one other question.
Okay.
I do have one question, Mr. Chair. In Mr. Bennett's assessment, I mean, will it also be determined if one comes down and we preserve one, as was suggested by Councilman, one of the councilmen said that 30 minutes ago. I don't know. So if the alternative were to come back, one is, really bad and the other one is, salvageable, will that also be as part of this assessment? The information we're going to get back from Mr. Bennett?
You're
I
on
think that's what was discussed.
Yeah. As I understand it, the proposal that we've given the city a number of proposals, but this proposal that we're discussing right now is one in which we would actually do preservation work on both. It would be entirely reasonable if we found that one was in such terrible shape that we got to the point we said we recommend not doing this on one of these chimneys. It would be entirely reasonable to come back to the city and say, we would like to change the scope of this project and we would like to preserve one but not the other.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any more discussion on this matter?
No, I'll go along with that.
Okay. Mayor, would you please repeat that motion for the record, please?
Okay, so I move that we approve the item at number 14, but amended to be engineering services and design for the full preservation of both stacks, along with the creation of a task force as recommended by Councilmember Shade and composed thereof to make a definitive recommendation back to council by, I think he said, the second meeting of January.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
One more question.
Yes, Councilmember Mitchell.
If they can't come back in the next 2 weeks and state that one of the smokestack is in terrible shape, then would we have to do another amendment? No.
I think we have to cross that bridge when we get there, quite frankly.
Right, because I think the assessment next week will.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's right. But we're not approving any construction tonight.
Right.
We're approving engineering and design. And if, as Mr. Bennett just said, if some condition comes to his knowledge over the next little while, he'll come back to us and change the scope of what he's setting out to do.
Okay, that's what I wanted to come into.
For the sake of order, please be recognized because there are other people that have had their hands up. Councilman Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a point of clarification with the email that Councilmember Shayed had sent in this motion for the task force. Is the direction to the task force pursuant to the proposal that Councilmember Shayed had sent out in terms of looking for 50% of the funding to come from private sources?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we're ready to vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
Aye.
Okay, so we're going to defer 15, right?
Correct. Move to defer number 15.
Okay.
Second.
Moved and properly second. All in favor of deferring number 15,
Aye.
say aye.
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 Committee on Real Estate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Committee on Real Estate met yesterday afternoon. We had a very full agenda. The first item was to approve a third amendment to the lease agreement between the city and Echo West East Shed Development LLC, so they could find a third-party tenant to occupy the space. Lee Bailey is on the line, and Lee may be able to give you a little more in-depth discussion about that. So Lee, we'll call on you to just briefly describe that for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, council member. So we've been in a master lease agreement with EcoVest Development LLC since around 2012. They did initially have a subtenant in the space that was running a restaurant. It's been vacant for about 15 months. Unfortunately, that tenant did not make it, unfortunately. but they have lined up a new tenant that looks very promising. They've spent a good bit of time with planning with internal staff, and we're excited about the project on their behalf. The one thing I would point out is there are some rent concessions in this amendment to approve the subtenant to provide time for them to temporarily abate rent, to provide some upfit on the building, but they are providing about almost $2 million in upfits to the space, which obviously is in the city's favor. And I'm happy to answer any specific questions that I can.
And the committee voted to approve and recommend this to full council for approval.
Okay.
I move for approval.
Second.
Just a minute. Mike Seekings, Councilman Seekings.
Thank you. Just very briefly, Mr. Chairman, this is a really great deal for the city. I want to thank the real estate committee and Lee, your team, for putting this together. If this all works as it should, you've got a local development team going to put in a local operator into a space that's essentially been empty for a number of years. So in a very difficult time, this is some very good news for the corridor that we've been so worried about, putting a business into the Upper King Street area that is a tried and true developer with a tried and true operator that is locally based, and with all hard work, it will be successful. So this is some good news on the back end of some really bad news in that corridor.
Councilwoman Jackson.
Thank you. Following up Councilmember Seekings, I totally agree with that. And I just want to put in the plug for the Children's Museum. I read the renewal of the lease carefully because I have been learning a lot about the museum as an education resource for our community, especially for the neighborhoods where the kids go to school locally. They get scholarships to go to the museum. The museum has had an amazing rehab renovation over the last year. And unfortunately, COVID has just slammed them to the ground. So the fact that the restaurant that is going to be subleasing, they have strict requirements to have a family-friendly establishment, essentially, which will be a very interesting new role in this group's repertoire, as far as I understand. But I really do hope that we can all figure out how to better support the Children's Museum. Their counterparts across the country are going dark. And this is not a tourist attraction. The Children's Museum is a bricks and mortar educational institution, and I really hope that we can start thinking about it that way. So I just want to put in a plug at the same time as we're bringing in a great establishment. Thanks.
Any more questions, discussions?
Councilmember Sacrin has his hand up.
Councilman Sacrin.
Thank you, Chair. Just real quick to piggyback on Councilwoman Jackson's point with the Children's Museum. It really isn't a museum. And I think the name, doesn't do it justice in many ways, but it's really a place where young kids go in the particular neighborhood, Charleston, that go and learn about STEM and, college readiness activities. And I think as a council, we should start thinking about maybe putting them in another category. And we've had that discussion with Carol Jackson. I've met with the executive director. I know Councilman Appel has met, and she's reached out to many of us. So I just want to say thanks for listening to them. But it really is a jewel for our young folks in our community, and we really need to look at them not as a museum, but really an educational resource. I'm personally bringing some of my students in the after-school program there to try to help them out. And just as we continue with the budget and thinking about them, I think we should put them in a different category as a museum. So thanks, Carol, for bringing that up.
Councilman Sacrin, wouldn't you agree that it's a little more than STEM, that it is STEAM, because there is an art portion of it?
Absolutely, and she, the executive director, is on the special commission, Councilman Gregory, who's for our youth and education. So hopefully she will provide some input, help that special commission think about inequities that we have, because they serve many kids in our neighborhoods. As you know, they serve that general area, which is over near Charleston Progressive, Meminger, and Mitchell, and many of those students come for free or low cost. And that's their only experience that they get sometimes during the summer or for STEAM activities. So I think it's an incumbent upon us to look at them and look at their mission a little bit more carefully.
Councilman Waring.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Add me to the list, Councilwoman Jackson and Councilman Sacrin. Actually, our family is a annual members of the Children's Museum. They do great works over there, and I really think support Councilman Sacrum, maybe look at putting them in a different category, because they're much more than just a museum. Thank you.
Okay. Any more discussion? There were some items, Councilmember Sheed, that we had to vote on. So
Yeah, I'm not finished with the report, Mr. Chairman. So item B was a recommendation that we approve. This is very interesting. A lease for a one parking space to place a dumpster. The amount of rent was calculated on the lost revenue for the use of that parking space. That was also recommended that we approve that. We also had two annexations. We recommended that those annexations, one in District 7, one in District 5, be approved. We had an add-on for the authorization to execute a rental agreement with St. Andrew's Pool and Park for the use of their pool on a temporary basis, while our other pools were being under some maintenance and repair work. We also recommended that that temporary lease be used so that our residents, and particularly school-age students, can continue their swim. All those were passed unanimously for recommendation, and I'll pass it on to council. Then we had a discussion on an archaeology ordinance, and it was recommended from one and only Jacob Lindsay that we create a task force to include myself, somebody from Historic Charleston, Charleston Preservation, the Gullah Society, and Charleston Museum to look at some of the aspects as to what can be done short of an archaeology ordinance, or make recommendations along those lines. Not necessarily that we have the funding to hire somebody full-time staff, but to see what we can do in the interim in the event that we do come up with some funding, or what can we do short of a official ordinance to address things such as burial grounds and other archaeological digs along the lines. And finally, we had a discussion on annexation of some of these donut holes throughout the city, particularly in West Ashley. And Mr. Lindsay's recommendation was that we task our GIS department to come up with an idea to do sort of an inventory of what we're looking at with some of these properties that are not in the city, but are surrounded by other residences and properties that are annexed within the city. And that's my report, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Griffin.
Yes, sir. I just got a question and then a quick follow-up, but I'm just wondering, what exactly is the motive behind the donut hole? Are we looking to eliminate the PSD, or are we going after just pieces of property that have multiple city residents around them? Because in my district, I've got a large neighborhood, Drayton on the Ashley, and they're almost entirely PSD, and they do an amazing job, St. Andrew's PSD, of serving them, with trash pickup and cleaning their ditches. And we've had such a hard time with environmental services over in my district. I couldn't imagine if we annexed that whole neighborhood, and we can't even serve the people that we have now in terms of our environmental services. So I'm just wondering, are we looking to try to increase the tax base, or are we just trying to make things a little bit easier on, areas where 99% of the area is city and 1%'s PSD? I'm just wondering what the motive is there.
And Mr. Chairman, if I can respond to that, the motive is not to get rid of the St. Andrews Public Service District. The motive is to look at some of these areas that are surrounded by the city, in which property is not annexed. There's a lot of that exists in the Avondale area, Maryville, Ashleyville, Huntington Woods in my district. And I'm just giving you sort of a sample of that. But it's not to look at an overall large land grab. It's mainly to look at some of these areas in which we're duplicating services such as trash pickup, police. A lot of my residents are complaining that they can't get, for instance, speed bumps, because half the streets in the city, and the other half is not in the city. So so the point is, let's do an inventory first, what we're talking about, and then come back and we'll study this a little bit more. But at least it's a first step in addressing this issue.
Thank you for the clarification, Councilmember Shea.
Councilman
Yes,
Seeking.
ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, I just don't want to let this opportunity go past without recognizing some really great work on the part of our staff in the city. Councilmember Shea noted that the Cone Street matter was an interesting matter. It's a little bit more than that. If any of you know where Cone Street is, it's parallel to East Bay Street, behind, slightly north of Broad, where they're building the new hotel, and there's a parking garage there. There's a bunch of parking spaces back there. And there's long been a dumpster there, and there's been a lease with the city on that space for some years. And I want to thank Peter Rasco and Dan Riccio, but mostly Peter, for getting on that, finding the lease, finding the owners of that lease, renegotiating the lease, and making sure not only do we have 2020 rates on that lease, but also that that area is now clean and will be clean. It was a huge improvement that no one would have ever noticed or done had Peter and Dan not gotten on it. So thank you all for doing that. I think it's going to really make a big difference back there. And I know the businesses in that corridor really appreciate it. So thank you.
Any further questions? Councilman Sheed, you made a motion to accept as submitted. I didn't hear a second.
Second.
Moved and properly second.
Did that, Mr. Chairman, did that include the amendment, the addition?
Yes.
That included the amendment with the pool rental for St. Andrews. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 The ayes have it. Is there anything else to come before this committee? If not, we stand adjourned. See you in a few. Bye-bye.
2 minutes. City